Guys, how are we doing tonight? Pretty good with Family Feud. You guys, I was impressed on a couple of those. All right, way to go. All right, so we're in our fourth week of our series called Swim Lessons, and we're just kind of talking about how sometimes we get thrown into the deep end of life. You ever been there? To where like the stuff you got to deal with and how you deal with it, and understanding other people who are in there with you. It can be kind of crazy. One of the areas that can be most difficult for us when it comes to being thrown in the deep end of life, we're not ready to swim, we're not ready and prepared for it, we're just having to deal with it, is when we struggle with family. Anybody ever been there where it's been difficult to deal with family? A couple of you, most of you. All right. Sometimes it is very, very difficult. We're playing Family Feud tonight, and that's kind of fun, but you're also looking at it like, no, my family is the one that feuds. And when you come to youth group and you are able to get away for a little bit, it's just kind of, it's peace because you don't have to deal with that other stuff. I can remember, I had a decent family experience, so I don't want to pretend like it was terrible. Like, it was really good. But even in a really good environment, there was some serious problems at times between me and my sister, and then sometimes between me and my parents. My dad and I would go at it like cats and dogs in spots. I can remember I think I was like 5th grade, so I was just a touch younger than most of you guys, 5th grade if you were there. We were playing soccer. He was one of my coaches, and this is what I found. I loved it when my dad was a coach, and I hated it when my dad was a coach. Because then I had to hear it on the way back. So as I am finishing up soccer practice, I was working on some of my stuff for being a goalie, and there was I was letting a lot of goals in. And like in my mind it was this person's fault and it was the defender's fault, and like I understood what I was supposed to do, and it was everybody else's fault. And so my dad is just getting on me in practice, and finally on the way home, he's just like, listen, like this is what you need to do. Now guess how I took that in that moment. I was like, oh, you know what? Like, thank you so much for sharing your years of wisdom. Like I know you have state records in soccer, but I'm just gonna appreciate all that and take it. Do you think that's how I responded? No. I responded just how all of you respond in those moments when your mom or your dad or somebody starts to tell you something, your sister or your brother or like an aunt or uncle, a grandparent, as they start to give instruction, what goes up inside of you, you're like, shut up. And I snapped back at my dad, and like we just started fighting on the way home, to where when we got home, I walk in the house, I storm in, my dad comes in behind me, and he's like yelling something, and I just kind of, now this is not me, but I just kind of go away from him. Like, I was yelling at him, and then I just bail. And I come back, and I talk to my mom later, I'm like, can you believe this guy? And my mom was like, what did you say to him? And, like, we ended up, it worked out some. But that, I can still remember the fight that we had. This is like almost, I think, this is like 25 years ago, and I can still remember, like, my face, my anger that was building up inside of me. And for some of you, you have to deal with this sometimes. For some of you, you have to deal with it a lot. And as you think about it, and as you're dealing with this, some of you, you've been hurt. Your parents maybe care for you, but they hurt you a lot. Or at least you feel like you experienced the hurt from them a lot. Maybe there's unreasonable expectations. Always got to be perfect. Always got to be right. Maybe it's just nagging all the time. Or what you perceive as nagging all the time. And you just kind of feel like, I'm a teenager at this point, but the way that we converse and the way that we talk, I feel like I am a 2-year-old, or at least I'm being treated that way. None of you have ever experienced that, right? Nobody? Okay, good. So maybe you're in a spot to where you just wish your parents would pay attention to you. And you just feel neglect. And sometimes you get into arguments just to experience, oh, they're communicating with me. So here's the question I want us to think about tonight. all of us have different experience, but what do you do when your family is feuding? What do you do when your family's feuding? How do you handle this? And what do you do, especially when it's your parents? Now, there's something I want to say here first before we get into what God's Word has to say about it and how we can apply it to our lives. Here's the first thing that I want to share with you. We'll put it up on the screen here. There's a difference between getting our feelings hurt by our family and being put in danger by our family. A lot of times, like, we will be in spots to where the things that are said to us and the things that are done to us, they will hurt us emotionally really badly. But there is a difference between being emotionally really hurt, which needs to be talked through. You need to care for people. You need to, like, maybe talk to a leader or somebody that you're close with about it. But there's a difference between having our feelings hurt and being put in physical danger. And if you might find a spot to where you're just put in physical danger, if you're talking to a leader, talking to one of the parents or your guardian to be able to help you kind of think through that, you need to talk to somebody about it. So when we're talking about this stuff tonight, I need you to keep this distinction in mind. Does this make sense? All right. So if your feelings are hurt, there's a difference between that and being actually put in danger. Because if you're put in danger, you need to talk with somebody. Here's the second thing. And when we talk about feuding with our family, we've got to ask the question: why do we feud? Why on earth do we actually have these arguments? And I'm sure many of you can tell us in this moment, because my parents are ridiculous, or because my siblings are ridiculous, and we already know that. But why do we feud? We're going to look in James chapter 4. We're going to look at verses 1 through 3. If you're using one of our Bibles, it's page 848. I didn't have you guys get them. I'm sorry. If you want to go grab one, go ahead. But if you can turn in your own Bibles, James chapter 4. We're not going to have it up on the screen. But I want to just read this for you guys. James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. And as you guys are looking at it, I'm going to warn you on this. I just want you to read this with an open mind. Because you can read this and completely close your mind off to what God is about to say here. So think of it this way. If you're a follower of Jesus, be like, all right, I'm just going to listen to you, God, and see what you have to say. If you're not a follower of Jesus, maybe take a look at it and say, all right, well, what does God have to say about when we get in arguments or when we feud? So James chapter 4, verse 1, it says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? It's a good question. We're asking that question tonight, aren't we? What causes fights and quarrels among you? What causes feuds among you, your family, your relationships with people that you have? Verse 2, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. Let's stop there for a second. See, the first thing that we need to understand is that all of our families are different. All of our families are different. But they all have one thing in common. Do you know what that is? Our families are all different, but they all have one thing in common. Every family is made up of imperfect people. What's that last line? And that includes you. I'm sorry, we're going to speak some truth here tonight, and it's not necessarily going to be fun, but that includes you. Now, when we're dealing with imperfection in family, whose imperfection do we notice? Everybody else. But as James is starting to talk, who's he saying? Why do you fight and quarrel? It says this, right? Your parents desire and they do not have, and so they kill. Your parents covet and they cannot get what they want, and so they fight with you. Is that what it says? See, the thing that we got to pick up of this, James starts to point the finger where? At us. If you want to start to deal with fighting and quarreling and feuding in your family, guess where you start? With yourself. The biggest enemy in your feud is you. Do you realize that? We'll put it up on the screen. The biggest enemy in your feud is you. Now, I know many of you are thinking in this moment, that's not true. Because the biggest enemy in my feud is my parent, or the biggest enemy in my feud is my sibling. The biggest enemy in my feud is the person that I'm arguing with. But James starts to lay it out for us to help us to start to think about this. Our biggest enemy is actually us. He wants us to first look at ourselves before we start to look at others. See, here's the thing. We desire. He talks about how we desire. We have desires within us. Now, can desires be good?
Yes.
Yeah. There can be a lot of good desires. Let me think of it this way. Is it a good desire to want to be loved and nurtured by your parent? Is that a good desire? Yeah, it is. But oftentimes, when they start to push and nag and hurt you, you feel deeply wounded, right? Because your good desire is now not being met. And so immediately we would start to say, it's that person's fault because I have a good desire in this moment and they are not fulfilling it. But see, when we start to think of desires, we have to think of it this way. You twist a good desire when you're willing to sin to get what you want, or because you didn't get what you want. You ever think of it that way? We have good desires, but they turn into sin when we are willing to sin to get what we want, or because we didn't get what we want. Let me tell you about the story with my dad again here in just a second. When I was with my dad, my desire within me, what I wanted, was I wanted some respect. Is it a bad desire to want respect or to feel like you earn respect? To feel like you're treated fairly? Is that necessarily a bad desire? No. But in that moment, guess what I wanted? I wanted that, and so I was willing to sin to get. And that's where a good desire gets twisted. And James is starting to delve into our own lives and starting to look at our own lives and say, hey, guys, listen. It starts with you. You might have the perfect desire. You might have a God-given desire for something healthy and amazing. But the moment you're willing to sin against the other person, or to sin because you didn't get what you wanted, then that desire becomes twisted and we start to sin and we start to hurt and we start to feud, not because of what the other person did, but because of what is going on in our own hearts. That's not what I normally think of. I'm always thinking of, well, that's their fault. You ever have the argument in your head? You're about to have an argument with your parents and you're running through it in your head. Guess who always wins that argument? Me. And James is starting to say, hey, any reason why you might always win in your own head? Who's always the winner? Who's always the victorious one? Who's always on the good side? And you got to recognize that your sinful nature inside of you makes you your own worst enemy when it comes to these things. And so we covet or we murder. We lash out outwardly or we lash out inwardly. We lash out outwardly by saying, I hate you, or throwing things, or saying worse things than I hate you. Mm-hmm. Or saying something good, but saying it very snarky. You ever done that? Mm-hmm. Like, you should love me in this moment. I don't understand why you don't care about me and my feelings. It's kind of a decent statement. But do we normally make it in a very decent way when we're talking to our parents? Huh?
No.
Or maybe inwardly we withdraw. We pretend everything's fine, but inside there's a war going on. We're becoming bitter and bitter and bitter and bitter and bitter and bitter and bitter. And we start to lash out inwardly. So James chapter 4, let's go on and read the second half of the verse. Second half of verse 2. It says, you do not have because you do not ask God. Now that's weird because most of the time we don't get what we want because the other person's not giving it to us. But he's saying, listen, the reason why you don't have is because you're not asking God. Well, okay, I'll ask God. God, I want them to treat me fairly. Why is it not happening? Some of you might have even prayed that. Go on to verse 3. It says, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your own, what is that last word? On your own passions or on your own pleasures. You get proper desires, but you start to twist them. And you maybe even ask God, but the reason why you ask God is just so you can feel better in the moment. And it may be a good desire. We may want to be treated fairly. We may want to have the hurt actually stop, but it's all around what we can get out of it instead of how we can love someone else. Even in good things, we're trying to just be selfish and look out for ourselves. So maybe we have good desires, but when we are selfish, we tame them. And they just become about getting what we want. So how do we respond to a feud with our parents? That's the question I wanted us to think about. We know the Bible says, all right, why do we feud? We feud because we want something. And we have to flip that over to instead of it just being us taking, we need to be willing to give. So what would it look like? How should we respond to the feud with our parents? Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. Awesome section of the Bible on how you are supposed to relate to your parents or your guardians or those who are over top of you. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. I want to just focus on one word here to start, and it's in verse 2. It's the first word, honor. Honor. Honor your parents. See, here's the thing that you have to recognize. If there is a God, and He did create the world, and He is sovereign in charge over the world, that means your parents are actually put there by God. And God has placed them as your parent in that role of caring for you. They might not do a good job of it. They may stink at it. Let's just be honest. But God knows, and He actually knows their flaws. And here's the thing that you guys got to realize, it's difficult to raise kids. You just look at it from your perspective all the time, but it's tough. And your parents' weaknesses, guess what happens? They get exposed in the process of parenting. And being a parent is a really big, important, and honorable task. A task that is worthy of respect. Whether the person does a great job or not, God says the task itself is worthy of respect. And so we have an opportunity to honor our parents. When I was dealing with my dad, I had an opportunity in that moment to recognize God has placed him there over me. Whether he was right or not, God still placed him there. And I have an opportunity to honor God in this moment. How would I do this? How would this look? 2 words that I want you to think about. You're going to think about honor. How would it look like to honor my parents? Listen and obey. 2 words that are like taboo in our culture. No one wants to listen, and obey is like oppressive, isn't it? Listen and obey. But Proverbs chapter 22, or 23, verse 22, it says this. Listen to your father who gave you life. It sounds like a Bill Cosby sketch. I know Bill Cosby has gotten... we don't talk about Bill Cosby anymore. But, like, you ever think about that? Your parents gave you life. Listen to them. They might have actually gone through a little bit more than you have. Or at least because of their position. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but they may stink at being a parent. And they may have no clue what it is to be a parent. And it may be very difficult for them. And yet, they've lived longer than you and probably have experienced some other stuff than you. And so, giving them the courtesy of listening to them, whether they have a good advice or not, but you just respecting them as a person. Listening to them matters. And do not despise your mother when she's old. That's funny. Because it's like, crazy old woman, we're not going to listen to her. How many teenagers think that about your mother, right? You're like, pretty old. All right, anyways, keep going. So that's, listen, how about obey? What is obey? Ephesians 6 talks about that. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. You want to understand what God says is right. You want to understand God's will for your life. Many of you guys are trying to figure out, all right, what's God's will? Should I play this sport or that sport? Should I go to this school or that school? What should it look like? And God says, here's my will for you. Obey your parents. Now, he puts a caveat on it, in the Lord. So if your parents tell you to do something that goes against God, then you don't obey them in that act, but you still honor them in the way that you deal with them. And God says, this is right. This is right. And so we obey, not just in action, but with attitude. It's disastrous, isn't it? Like, when I was with my dad, imagine how it would have gone down if I had honored him. I'm still thinking back to some of the things he said, and I'm like, no, you're wrong. Like, to this day, I still think he was wrong on a couple of things. But what if I honored him? What if I took the time that instead of just blowing up, I'm recognizing, you know what? I have a desire, and my desire is to be treated fairly. But you know what? It's just so I can feel good. It's just so I can have the respect that I feel I deserve. And so that I'm twisting that desire right now. So instead of twisting it, God, can you help me to honor my dad? Help me to listen to him. So what if instead of arguing, I said, hey, Dad, what am I doing wrong? And can you help me with it? I know it opens up a lot of can of worms on that. But you're taking a moment to listen. You're taking a moment to listen. And then you look to obey in the Lord. You can talk about this in your group a lot. But what if you give them the moment to actually speak into your life? Now, if their advice is absolutely crazy and it's wrong, but you have this open dialogue now to where you can kind of go back and forth, you can improve in your relationship on that. So listen and obey. And it honors God, and it honors your parents, and it actually extends your life when you do that. I know that's tough. I know that's hard. And I know there's a whole bunch of yeah buts as we're going through this. But here's what I want to finish with, and I want you guys to split up the group. You can honor him by honoring your parents. That's what I want to leave you with. You can honor God by honoring your parents. You honor him by honoring your parents. So here's the question. Really, we got 6 questions to help you guys kind of walk through when you're in a tough situation. To kind of figure out, all right, what should I do? How should I do it? How can I get some advice? We have these cards in the back that I want you guys to take home with you. And they're just 6 questions to ask yourself or ask someone you trust to have them ask you when you're in a feud or when you're in conflict. And then maybe a question to ask at home would be this. Ask your family member you're in conflict with, what is one thing I should stop or start doing to make our relationship more joyful and peaceful? One thing. Not one thing. Not like multiple things. And keep your mouth shut and listen. Because it might be good, it might not be helpful, but keep your mouth shut and listen. All right, I'm going to let you guys go out to groups, and if you got questions, you can come up and ask. All right?